America, talk to me, Loren Colin, and let us go beyond what you believe to better understand why you believe anything. I am not here to debate. There are plenty of places for speaking right past one another, nor am I here to judge. Here on the We Unite, We Win podcast, User Generated America series, I will speak to anyone willing to give me an hour of their time to share their clearly stated morals, ethics, religious beliefs, or lack of, and views on humanity that inform their personal approach to culture, politics, and government. The aim of the UGA series is not to change anyone's mind. I am doing this in the hopes that you, the listener, will join me in putting aside your assumptions and listen to the guest for an hour. If the conversation gets you to ask a question about yourself and about your own beliefs and why you believe anything, all the better. I am excited to always be bringing you more of this content. Please consider supporting this work and becoming a paying member at $8 per month by visiting weunitewewin.com. Today's guest is John Burg. John, a friend of our previous guest, Loren Colin, has made service his lifelong calling. Along the way, John has found direction, purpose, and fulfillment in meditation, reflection, and faith. Listen as John shares with me where his beliefs come from and how his journey shapes who he is today. Let's chat with John Burg. I am with John Burg. He is joining the We Unite, We Win podcast, User Generated America series. And John comes to us the way we love our guests to come to us. He is a friend of Loren, who was a previous guest, and she reached out and he agreed. Not to jump ahead, but I'm already excited to see who John might bring next. But right now, we have John. Welcome, John.
Hey, thanks, Loren. Thanks for having me.
To open, tell us a little biography about yourself. Where are you from? Where do you live now? Maybe what you did, or if there's like that one thing that's the John story that you share with us. Well, oh, that's John. Please share.
Sure. I was born in 1973 in London, England, because my parents were overseas doing some academic work, and my mother was too pregnant with me for British Airways to let her on a plane for a transatlantic trip. So I've got the dual U.S.-UK citizenship. Spent most of my formative years in Central Virginia, just outside Charlottesville. Went to undergraduate in Arizona State University and ended up spending about 10 years in Arizona, a lot of which was spent working and saving up money for college so I wouldn't go into debt. And so it was a good 9-10 year period for undergrad. And in that time, a lot of the work I did on the side to get money for school was a professional bicycle mechanic and working on construction sites. At one point, I just gave up on college altogether and started my own home improvement company. Did that for about a year until I learned that I should have been paying taxes and then had to sell off all my truck and tools. So that was a real heartbreaker. Went back to school, finished, but doing a volunteer bicycle work exposed me to the field of international development. And that motivated me to go back to school, get a master's degree in sustainable development. From there, I spent about 3 years in West Africa working for a US-based NGO, essentially using my bicycle mechanic trade skills, working with bicycle dealers, usually just roadside bicycle dealers, helping them improve their business acumen and forming co-ops. So that involved learning how to get a checking account, a business checking account, and banding together with other bicycle dealers in other villages so that they could pool their resources and get access to a better quality and quantity of parts and bikes to help people keep using their bikes. This is really a transportation project, and a lot of the work centered around helping rural farmers get their produce to market, as well as helping kids get access to bicycles so they could get to school, and did that for 3 years. And in that time, became exposed to this whole world of international donors and the lack of coordination. And so, long story short, ended up in Washington, D.C., working for the U.S. Treasury Department as a program assistant, and really got a sense of how U.S. foreign assistance works, which is very different than how it has been portrayed in the media recently at the beginning of 2025. And really, that's how I got on this 25-year-long career track of International Development and ended up spending 5 years at the U.S. Treasury Department's Office of Technical Assistance, including doing a year in Iraq, in Baghdad, Iraq in 2010, 5 years with the U.S. State Department's Office of U.S. Foreign Assistance Resources, and almost a decade with the U.S. Agency for International Development. And you'll see a lot. That's not a screensaver background. Those are all real accolades from my time in places like Afghanistan, Iraq, Haiti, as well as working on issues like preventing the Zika virus as a zoonotic disease control using nuclear energy to sterilize mosquitoes and all sorts of crazy different things over the years. So that's kind of the quickest story of me I can tell.
You've done a lot. You've seen a lot. A lot of that is in service, which is amazing. And thank you. While you were doing all that service and you were traveling and ultimately you were still learning who you are, do you think about your own personal happiness and pursuing your own happiness and maximizing that happiness?
It has certainly changed how often and how deeply I reflect on just the concept of happiness and what is my happiness. Has certainly changed since getting laid off from USAID at the end of January of this year. Used that time initially to really do some deep soul searching, coming out of having spent a quarter century in one career field and seeing a lot of those opportunities evaporate was jarring and emotionally traumatic for me and a lot of colleagues. And so being out of work, but also being older, I'm in my 50s now. And so having some resources to where I did not immediately have to go and get the quickest job in order to maintain income to survive. I had a little bit of a cushion in order to just take a step back, take a deep breath, and actually think about things like the question that you just asked, what is happiness? Is this the end of a 25-year-long career to where I need to now reflect on what will make me happy? Because even though I'm in my 50s, I'm by no means able to retire early. And, several months later, I'm still reflecting on what would make me happy while I do good. And one of the things I started doing in short order after I got laid off is volunteering with a local nonprofit that helps the elderly age in place, specifically bringing out my old carpentry skills and helping to make modifications and home improvements to local elderly to help them age in their homes. And that was a really big eye-opener. And this all ties back to, happiness and what makes me happy. And it made me very happy to do something for somebody and see the immediate impact. For 25 years, the international development community and industry talks a lot about making an impact. And that can be a bit abstract when you're talking about it from Washington, D.C., and even in the field with the USAID mission abroad. But in this case, it was a great reminder of what it means to help somebody, but to do that regularly in service of my community. And so that has morphed into the startup of kind of a local handyman services, which sure, the money's not great, but it's incredibly satisfying. And it makes me happy to be able to provide services to people in my community that might have either small projects or not have the resources to fund critical projects. And I'm a sort of a gap-filling resource between what they can do themselves and hiring a licensed contractor. I'm filling a niche. It makes me happy. It's a little bit of income, and it gives me an opportunity to have an immediate positive impact on the community and the people that I live around. So that has brought me happiness. But it has also been an opportunity to get into meditating again and really reflecting and getting into deep meditative states and not have to have any kind of meditative agenda, just to sort of be and breathe and lower my blood pressure. So while my income has dropped off a cliff, my sleep hygiene has skyrocketed.
You sort of defined happiness as service, and it sounds very important to you. And it sounded like at a young adult age, you found yourself there. Did you know that about yourself even younger, or was it more like you said, you sort of fell into it as sort of college unfurled ahead of you?
Yeah, there was a period of time between uh, high school and sort of right when I was starting college. I got into some pretty serious legal trouble that we can probably skim over for this conversation today. But if you ever go back and have deeper conversations with previous interviewees, maybe we can delve into that because that's a very long, complicated story. But it was a real turning point in my young life. I think I was 18 or 19 years old and was living in Tempe, Arizona, because I was going to Arizona State University. And had to take time off from school to pay things like court fees, restitution, etc. And was working two full-time jobs, unskilled menial labor, and it was just crushing to try and comply with the terms that the court had put on me. I did eventually satisfy all the requirements and so on and so forth, but that period of time was a real pivotal period where I was reflecting heavily on what it means to earn one's oxygen on this planet. How do I justify my existence? How do I make sense of my existence? How do I find meaning in my existence beyond just satisfying impulses and whims and whatnot? But yeah, I eventually sort of went through a long period of reflection, and where I landed is that the best way I could use my natural talent, skills, and abilities, but still be doing something good for somebody, was as a bicycle mechanic. And so I lied my way into my first bicycle shop job. But it opened the door to what ended up being a 13-year-long career as my first career as a professional bicycle mechanic, which is what, as I mentioned, got me into international development. But on the issue of service, yes, that was something that was top of mind when I was 18 and 19, and must have spent hours and weeks reflecting on that. Not in free time because I didn't have any, but while I was doing this menial work, keeping your mind busy with something and thinking about what does a win-win-win on this planet at this time look like for me? And so that's sort of where I came out on that. And that period of reflection continues to pay dividends to this day because it helped me get into a line of work that gave me an actual trade skill. And in fact, full circle, now that I'm out of international development, I am back again. Also, in addition to being a handyman, being a paid bicycle mechanic for the city of Tacoma Park, which is a part-time gig. So doing a lot of little side hustles. But I have found that it's those massive periods of transition, like when I was 18 and 19, and now as well in my 50s, that help sort of put in place the next big building blocks for your next big life phase.
You mentioned early on about your current state of reflecting and meditating. You also said back when you were 18 or 19 and you were reflecting and meditating. Did that reflection and meditation come from a religious background? Were you ever religious? What was your journey to, as a young adult, already being a reflecting, meditative person?
Wow, what an interesting question. My older sister and I were raised by our single mom, but came out of their union. My father was raised Jewish. My mother was raised Catholic. I think their divorce had much more to do with personality than any sort of religious backgrounds or upbringings. But the result is that my sister and I were sort of left to discover religion and spirituality on our own. My sister sort of went off and explored religions based on who she was exposed to through her social circle, whereas I was a little bit more inward focused. I remember, I must have been maybe 14, 15, somewhere around in there, and just sort of rooting around in the storage in the attic, and found my mom's book. It was a cardboard box of self-help and spirituality books. And I thought, well, surely if this is ferreted away and hidden away, this must be forbidden. And so I read all of those books cover to cover, and it definitely had a formative impact on my spiritual and religious trajectory because I ended up graduating ASU with a degree in religious studies with a focus on Islamic civilization, not because I could ever make a life of it, but because it was so interesting to me that it was the only thing I was interested in enough to actually study the material and finish the degree. But yeah, things like religion have been responsible for so much in human history, everything from the greatest works of art to the deadliest wars. I find fascinating. But not just the organized religion side of it, but also the spiritual side. Going back to these self-help books, there was one in particular called Creative Visualization by Shakti Gawain. And it's kind of a short paperback manual on how to meditate and why to meditate. And yeah, gosh, in probably mid high school, got really deep into it. And after school, before my mom came home from work, I'd go out for walks in the woods around our house. Luckily, we never lived in any urban or too suburban of an area that didn't have woods that I could go get a little lost in. And yeah, kind of get in touch with the natural environment. And I think if there was any takeaway for me, as me, and my own personal relationship to any higher powers, that we have the freedom to have a direct relationship with all that is, however anybody chooses to define it. Some people prefer to worship together with others of similar faith, and others, more like me, prefer to sort of do so individually. But there was another interesting formative experience that had an impact, referencing this legal trouble I got into. Part of the 360 hours of community service I had to perform for the state, I requested and had to fight for permission to work with an organization at the time called the Greater Phoenix Youth at Risk Foundation. And their whole purpose was working with youth that had gotten involved in gangs, gotten in trouble, incarcerated, what have you. At one point, one of the local Native American reservations, a branch of the Navajo, that had contracted with the Greater Phoenix Youth Foundation to take a bunch of the res kids that were getting involved in gang activity and have a retreat with them. The big impactful thing for me is in the preparation for this retreat. We had flown in members of the National Tribal Council from tribes all around the lower 48 and held what they call a 40 rock sweat lodge, which is pretty intense and long. And you sit in what looks like a kind of an igloo dome shape made of willow reeds and animal skins with a fire pit in the center. And it lasts for hours, and just pouring water on these rocks heated by stone, and it eventually creates something far beyond a sauna. And it gets up to over 200 degrees, so you can't wear glasses or jewelry to avoid getting burns from the metal. But it was truly a spiritual experience with singing circles inside the sweat lodge. And yeah, I came out of it feeling transformed in every way, physically, emotionally, spiritually. But that helped solidify what it meant to be with people during an intense session of meditation and group reflection. And that had a huge impact on me. It was still spiritually an incredible experience that helped orient my internal spiritual compass and sort of calibrate it in a certain way. And so that continues to be my sort of orientation about wanting to honor the way others choose to connect with whatever higher powers, beings, energies, etc., and have respect for how people prefer to worship and connect. But that what brings us together in all cases, I can tell, is the idea of having faith, and that we're not just, worm dirt on a godless planet, so to speak. There are all sorts of unseen things that bind us together, whether that's vibes or energy or intent. But a lot of this, from my experience, connects with this concept of faith. And it doesn't even have to be necessarily what you individually have faith in, but just having it somehow seems to matter a lot.
Did you ever ask your mother why those books were hidden away?
Yeah. Years or decades later, I mustered up the gumption to bug her about those books. She's like, she had meant to donate him to a book place and just kept forgetting. She's a hoarder by nature, and just, you don't give away books. So she just put them in a box and threw them in the closet and forgot about them.
Do you know, did she go on her own journey, or did she stay Catholic and that was an experimental time for her and then it got left behind? Or
Loren, let me think about this for a second, because you just said something, you framed it in a way that I don't think I have ever considered it. And so I'm absorbing what you just said, because I think there's there's a lot in what you just said that's very salient to that situation for my mom, is that her Catholicism continues to haunt her to this day. And I think for her, that's the best word for it. Like, it traumatized her as a little kid, and it continues to haunt her to this day. But something you said really clicked in the sense, almost like she went through a phase. And rather than pick it up and carry what she learned forward from that phase, she figuratively and literally put it in a box and put it away and left it behind. And that was her free will and her choice. And whether she did that consciously or subconsciously, what you said just now helps me. Like, some things that had been long dormant and dust covered in my head just clicked together. So I think it's great that you phrased it that way. But it also left a little glowing something for me to discover on my own that I have decided to carry forward. So it's kind of funny in that way. It's funny how life does that.
Your parents, you said, divorced like at a point, sometime I assume early enough in your life, and they were of different backgrounds. And then you said your sister and you both explored. Was that because your parents left it open to you to explore, or they were also trying to give you their religions and you just weren't vibing them, and so you did explore?
My father, who turns 87 this year, was just out to visit me. He's in Texas now, where the majority of my family has relocated to. But he was out visiting 2 weeks ago, and I actually asked him, like, gosh, did you and Mom decide to not raise us with religion? And he seemed shocked and delighted to get the question, but he married her fully assuming that she would want to raise us in the Catholic Church, and he felt no obligation to raise us with any of his Jewish heritage. Yeah, I think his take is that Mom had just been sort of too traumatized by Catholicism as a kid to really do much about it as an adult, raising 2 kids. But again, no complaints. It gave me the freedom to escape that cycle of religious trauma. Again, I don't mean to badmouth organized religion, but I just did. And there it is. I said what I said.
You came to your own version of faith, meditation, reflection. Is there also some underlying more philosophical type, like virtues? Do those play roles like justice, courage, temperance, wisdom, or vices even? Greed, lust, gluttony. Do those come into play as you form your overall structure for the foundation that you build to live your life off of?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I don't know if I've got a whole lot to add to what you just said, because that was pretty all-inclusive. The only thing I would throw in there is because you mentioned things like lust, gluttony, etc. The one thing that wasn't in there was judgment. And yeah, people understand what it means to suspend belief when watching movies in the cinema like Avengers Endgame. But to live your life day to day and suspend judgment is somehow a much, much harder thing. And I think social programming in our society plays a big role in that, in welcoming judging others. Although the Christian faith and the 10 Commandments and various allegories from the Bible and stories really discourages judgment, and yet so often it happens a lot on a subconscious and unconscious level because it's so baked so deeply into our society and our social structures and social norms, that it's really hard to get away from. When myself or others have vices or weaknesses or sins or what have you, it's one thing to observe that, it's another thing to judge. Yeah, I find the older I get, the better I'm getting at not judging others. And that also goes for political divergent views. And I'll give you a great example. My mother-in-law voted for Trump, and my wife held a big grudge against her for it, for a lot of different reasons, including her husband, me, getting laid off. I find it almost difficult to judge people who did vote for a political figure whose actions I find abhorrent. The older I get and the more I'm sort of more comfortable letting some inner light into the way I see the world around me. I find that to negatively judge others for things that even if I don't agree with, that judgment takes energy. And maybe I'm just getting lazy, too lazy to judge others. I don't know. And it doesn't feel good either.
to judge.
Correct. I mean, again, that's observing is different than judging.
What would be the mechanism in your mind to get Americans to be less judgmental?
I don't mean to blow smoke up your backside, Loren, but this. One of the reasons that I wasn't able to judge my mother-in-law harshly for voting for Trump is because I know her well enough to know where her mind was at in terms of her understanding the world and what motivated her decisions. And it's exchanges like this and people like you who do want to do and find those answers to your own question. So just understanding. And it's funny because when I was in junior high, I thought of myself as a Republican and a Herbert Walker Bush fan, and the Russians are bad and communism is bad. And when I was 16, the summer of 1992, no, maybe 1990, my father, who's an academic, was in Indonesia doing some academic work and teaching at a local university. And I went out and spent the summer with him. And that was a great eye-opening experience about other cultures, especially a relatively moderate Islamic republic. Had been taking German all through high school and got into an exchange program. And so when it was my turn to go take some high school classes in Germany and be there right after the Berlin Wall fell and the whole capitalism, communism, and the wall coming down. And these are all experiences that happened to me at a young enough age that I didn't have to necessarily learn to appreciate other perspectives that are tied to other cultures. It happened early enough that it just kind of soaked into me. And I found that very helpful. But it also opened my eyes to, even within the same culture, how you can still have so much animosity between different factions within any given culture. And so just to tie in these two past things, understanding the cross-cultural exchange can happen even within the same culture.
Actually, when you said different cultures, my first thought wasn't that we are one culture with different factions. Do you think that maybe part of why we get confused as Americans is thinking of ourselves more as a monoculture versus not, that we are actually a whole bunch of cultures, not just divided by state lines even, or regions, but that there's more of a milieu of culture than just an American culture, like you said, with factions?
Well, and I think that, yeah, you really hit on something that I think is big but unseen, which is some of the social program we get in the United States is all about what it means to be American, which oversimplifies differences between the North, the South, the East, the West, the whole Midwest, the Rust Belt, the Bible Belt. Yeah, and we're raised to say the Pledge of Allegiance as a way to sort of gloss over all these differences. And darned if you didn't hit on an interesting idea, Loren. How great would it be to have a civics class in school that really celebrated all of these differences instead of, this constant hammering home of founding fathers, one nation under God. Let's focus more on the melting pot side of this and celebrate that and acknowledge it for what it is.
In college, you do your foreign exchange, but in high school, we should do our urban/suburban to rural exchange, where as a sophomore, you're in the town in the middle of Kansas. We're going to assume it's rural, and you spend a semester here in Echo Park and Los Feliz and Silver Lake, and it'll blow your mind, right? And vice versa. I think an inter-American sophomore exchange would transform this country. Along those lines of why we aren't transformed, though, do you think that the idea of the monoculture, do you think it comes out of a white nationalism place, and that there's a power dynamic that stretches back to the beginning of this country that is, in fact, what is still the dominant in enforcing it? We just never thought differently.
Ooh, that's a great PhD thesis. And frankly, I'm struggling to find an entry point into really exploring those ideas because there just is so much. I mean, you take the obvious fact that this country's economy was built on slave labor. And that is such a huge piece of history that we continue to live today, whether you're African American or not, or something else, or white, middle-aged, straight white guy. It is such a part of America's history and culture that there is cultural trauma that comes with that. And it's interesting if you look at countries like South Africa that have sort of blown open this difficult past of apartheid, because apartheid blew itself into the forefront. They did have very public peace and reconciliations. You have also seen that in several African countries, but you don't see it here. And I think that conversations around reparations and structural racism exist because this is a part of our past that's never been fully exposed and accepted as factual history. And even now you see some faint efforts to either paper over or delete what there is available. So how you do get to that embracing of cross-cultural tensions within a single nation-state's nationalistic culture, and how it got to be that bad. I think all of what you said, all of the above, it all plays a role. Yeah, white nationalism, you name it. But again, for me, it all goes back to an individual's ability to, if you can't have empathy, at least have sympathy, even if you haven't been in somebody else's shoes. Make an effort to respect where they're coming from and suspend judgment. Judgment is such a shutter downer of being open to the learning from the experience of others.
Empathy is actually under attack right now by those in power. Are you shocked by that? It seems to be new. Like, I don't ever remember in my almost half century around here, I don't ever remember attacks on empathy being a thing, but now it's a thing, and it boggles my mind, I guess, when you hear that, because you just said the opposite, right? What we need is more empathy, but we have now a cultural push from the top of we should have less empathy. I don't even know how that idea comes into being, but how do we combat it?
Let me answer that question with a question. And while I could not agree more that empathy is under attack at a time when it seemed like we were really making some progress as a country based on historical traumas bubbling up to become shared traumas, and then to try and put a lid on a pot that's already boiling, I think is a dangerous prospect. And yet we're seeing that effort happen. And baked into a dynamic of this is artificial duality. You see that in our binary political parties. You're either Republican or Democrat, and anything in between, you're just throwing your vote away. And again, this goes back to my sincere praise for you and what you're trying to do, both with this podcast, but also in terms of politics, by running as an independent. And I don't know if you feel comfortable getting into this, but I would love to bring your experience into this discussion, to ask, when you chose to register as independent, like, what led you to that path? What was your journey?
What has bothered me in my gut since I was a teenager was any other human being who believed they were entitled to something. Mm-hmm. Anything. And in fact, I mean, I do answer. Are we entitled to something? Yes. We are each entitled to human dignity. We're all humans. There's dignity, and there's nothing else that you get because you are a human being. But it is the most important thing you get for being a human being. And so much of our culture is about denying dignity to either groups or individuals. And it doesn't matter if it's a group or an individual. While you deny dignity, you're doing that so that you get something more than is yours. It's just something that's been unsettled in me since I was 14 years old. I grew up in South Orange County, which gave us Ronald Reagan. It gave us Richard Nixon. It gave us the John Birch Society. And in fact, I mean, basically their 70-year war against the Great Society, their 100-year war against Social Security and a safety net, their 115-year, 120-year war against trust busting. They're winning that long war. What do I think will happen? Eventually they'll overstep. There'll be a revolt. We'll get back and history will repeat. Yay. I grew up with Democratic parents in this very much sea of red. I never thought Orange County would go blue. And now the whole coast of America, from Canada to Mexico, is blue. And at one point, 2 cycles ago or 3 cycles ago, all of Orange County was blue. But when I first registered when I was 18 years old and I got to vote in my very first election, which was 94, I registered as a Democrat. And then fast forward, had to re-register at college, moving up to LA. There was something even that I understood then. I could already see the writing on the wall that the Democrats, for me, were never going to fight for what I actually believed in, that it was going to be a lot of lip service, that it sounded liberal and it sounded progressive. But at the end of the day, when push came to shove and the votes mattered, I somehow knew at 18 that the Democrats wouldn't deliver on universal health care, wouldn't deliver on the rights of immigrants or undocumented immigrants to become documented. It's a simple solution to document them. On abortion, on gay rights. I remember at 18 or 17, we had a kid come out as gay in high school, which back then was a really big deal. And in some parts of this country, it still is a big deal. And what upsets me today is that it's a big deal. It was a big deal then, and it was a big deal now versus, again, no, you have dignity. You are who you are. Also, people's journeys change. I'm not saying people are choosing to be gay or not, but your journey of where you are and how you're comfortable changes over time. And to me, dignity means respecting that journey. So it's just something that's been inside me forever. And then I dabbled in politics and helped with a couple races, and then went on a professional career and got married, had kids, mortgage, all that. I'm like, I have to do this. And then my life changed a year and a half ago. And I was like, what do I want to do? How can I get that ultimate fulfillment? Because it was not going to be back at a corporate job. I did that for almost 3 decades. And so it came back to, I can do this. I can be an example of what I want. And what I want is, I'm not going to ever agree with someone who's at the end of the day is saying someone else is less than human. I'm never going to agree. But I will, as someone who believes in John Stuart Mill and will defend to the end liberty, I'll defend the right to believe it, but I'll also then defend my right to tell them, you're wrong. I want to have these dialogues, and it's odd, and I'll be honest here, and I'm going to have to, I think, maybe go on TikTok. I can't, either the people that I've interviewed are all within the circle, and they no longer talk to MAGAs or Republicans, and they basically cut them out of their lives, and vice versa. It's an understandable thing when the politics becomes a moral shingle of what you believe. So it becomes shorthand, and sometimes the shorthand, you don't need to dive any more into it. But that doesn't mean that people can't change. I do believe that people who don't give dignity to others, what they're missing ultimately is they're hurting themselves. So what they believe in, that they're acting in their own self-interest, because your mind only ever allows you to think you're acting in your own best interest. But as an observer, I can tell you're not. This was what I was going to say earlier when you said, are you getting lazy in old age to not judge? I think it's grace. What I've learned is to give that grace, that what I think you believe is abhorrent, I will fight to the end that you can believe it. But I'm going to give you the grace that you can change. Not that you want to change, because you might not ever want to, but in order for you to, you have the ability to change, you'll have to want to do it, and you'll have to come there on your own. And so it's not a matter of judging. I think we talked about cancel culture for so long. Judging was, you did this one thing in the past, or even you just did this one thing today, you are cut out. Versus, no, we should all want to learn and change and accept. So part of why I'm running as an independent is because people aren't happy as Republicans, and they became never Trumpers, and people aren't happy now with Democrats. I don't want to judge you for what you believed. I want to take where you're going and help you on that journey. So for me, it's learning that grace. So I think if you're choosing a side in a political world, you're already losing. So if you choose to be a Republican, you've already given up power. If you choose to be a Democrat, you've already given up some of your power. And so part of the work I'm doing, and my success might not happen in my lifetime. Like, I'm already more than comfortable with it. But if I can do that one person, if I get that one person who maybe 2 lifetimes from now is the one who's led to the ultimate change, then I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing.
Yeah, and I think that is laudable, commendable, and there's a common sense to it that yeah.
Thank you.
Claps for Loren.
I appreciate it. The old joke that common sense is anything but common.
And it's interesting too, look at other countries. Italy has 16 official political parties. And we've got 2 official, maybe 4 if you, depending on how strictly you interpret that. But yeah, it's just a false dichotomy.
Absolutely. And it's weird structurally we get into this because the only office that's truly bipartisan by how you have to vote, where mathematically makes sense, is president. But we all, again, we think of the highest, the biggest, and it's natural. It's not like Americans are the first people to like do this. Humans have done this for tens of thousands of years. We think of the biggest as the most important and what guides us. But the actual reality is the president has the least amount of impact on our day-to-day lives. But the people who have the most are your local officials and being involved locally. But we don't make that connection that we don't have to have partisanship locally, but because we do at the top, it makes its way all the way through. And then that dichotomy always shows up. To me, you get rid of the Electoral College, which is the last bit of democratization. Yes. And ranked choice voting, and open primaries. Those are the big 3. Open primaries, ranked choice voting, and at the very top, get rid of the Electoral College is what will bring people back into the fold to voting. 95 million people didn't vote the last election. Fully a third of Americans are not engaged for whatever reason. And I'm not saying that getting rid of the Electoral College, adding ranked choice voting and open primaries will fix it overnight, but it's those structural things that will start to invite people to participate again, where they feel like my vote matters.
And lowering the bar to entry is equivalent to making something more accessible. However, as you and I'm sure many of your listeners and viewers will know, that there are entrenched interests. You think of the DNC, the RNC, power structures that are very committed to maintaining their influence. Do you see those big 3 that you mentioned as also being able to potentially begin dissolving the grip that those 2 entities, organizations have on how politics is run as a business in this country?
I think ultimately it's us waking up to our own power. That's why I said when you choose a side, you've given up power. Choose yourself. And it sounds selfish, but it's not. Selfishness and self-interest are 2 different things. Selfish is greed, right? Donald Trump is selfish, and he's a narcissist and all these other things. At the end of the day, he's selfish. Elon Musk is selfish. Self-interest actually has in its requirement for you to be self-interested actually means that you have to make sure everyone else can follow their own self-interest, and they might collide, and your 2 self-interests might not align. And that's where then you negotiate in good faith and you work together. And out of that self-interest comes actually community. I think a lot of where socialists and socialism start, like you start with community. I'm like, human beings can never start at the point of community. It's just not how we're engineered. I don't think any animal probably is engineered that way. Even other pack animals like dogs, you're still going to take care of yourself. You're still going to make sure that you are fed, you are sheltered. But once you're fed and sheltered, dogs don't have to get clothed. But once you're fed and sheltered and clothed, it is incumbent upon you to make sure the next person over is also sheltered and has food and clothed. And after that, it kind of doesn't matter. And I think that's where we've lost this idea that this rugged individualism is more important than your own self-interest and caring about other people. And I actually think it ties right back to your original critique of judgment. I can judge you, and I'm going to, versus I can judge you, but I'm going to show you the grace and not. Or again, I'm going to just keep it to myself. Just keep it to yourself.
Well, and not to get too Adam Smithy, having self-interest is what can lead you to collective advantage when you understand that there can be a comparative advantage through a collective action rather than strictly individualism, even rugged or otherwise. But all of this, like, you live and breathe this stuff more than me and probably more than most Americans. And so I'm dying to ask you a question, a specific targeted question. how do you perceive similarities and differences between independents compared to libertarians?
Libertarians are Republicans who pretend they're not racist. I'm a socially liberal, fiscally conservative. No, if you choose the fiscally conservative at the expense of socially liberal, then you're not socially liberal. You're not a libertarian. And I think libertarianism is talk about something truly uniquely American, right? It's this idea that not only it's uniquely American, and it came from a Russian immigrant who survived on Social Security. And I think what's when you look at the electorate as a whole, we're at this point where a third identify as Republicans and a third identify as Democrats and a third as independents, and there's 2% Green and 2% Libertarian. Those independents are almost always lean D or lean R. When they get into the voting booth, it's not even lean. It's just really, I'm like an embarrassed Republican, so I call myself an independent, but I'm always going to vote. Even when it is Trump and it could be the end of the Republic, I'm still going to go with the R and say I'm an embarrassed Democrat, so I don't call myself a Democrat. I think my challenge to the American people is, are you truly independent? The third of you who claim to be independent, are you truly independent? And put the question actually back on them. What does it mean then? Why are you calling yourself an independent? I know I am, because neither party has ever actually stood for the things that I believe, or if they gave the veneer of standing for it, I know they've never fought for those things. I think MAGA is really happy right now because they have the people. I think while the Tea Party was completely astroturfed, backed by the billionaires, again, who've been fighting this war for 60 years and they're winning, good for them, bad for us. Even those original Tea Party Republicans were still 2 decades. And I think what Trump tapped into, because I don't think he believes anything. He believes in money and he believes in his whiteness is superior. I don't think he has any other motivations. And he would drop the white for the money. So his main motivation is money and his ego. I think what he tapped into was, even after the Tea Party movement, that most of the reactionary 1/3 of Americans that always supported W, they didn't want the words, they wanted the fight. And he's brought the fight. And there's no Democrat that I see out there who's brought the fight. There's a few people out there and they're getting recognized, and I applaud them. I applaud the Frosts. I applaud the AOCs. I think Bernie sometimes goes a little off the reservation, and I think sometimes I'll be ageist. I think sometimes his age puts him in a different place than other liberals and progressives. That's not to say that he's not saying the right things. But overall, there's no fight. And so to that question about less of what's libertarian, I think they're also embarrassed Republicans who just rather call themselves libertarians than Republicans. And as far as independents, what do they really want? Do they really want to define a government that works for them? And then if they do, what does that look like? And what are they willing to do to pursue it? And a lot of us are busy. Like, I get it. We're busy. I didn't do this for 2 decades because I was pursuing my professional career and I couldn't do both. And it's a lot to ask, even knocking on someone's door. I need 5 minutes of your time to talk about this thing that impacts you every day, is how you and your children, or your family if you don't have children, how you will experience opportunity for your life, but you put it so far back because you have all these other things that feel immediate. I think the challenge is politics is actually immediate, especially, again, if we're in a dictatorship, it's not. We have nothing to do. We just show up. You hope you don't get picked up off the streets. If you do, you hope they release you, because that's dictatorship. But in a participatory democratic republic, we're always told it's either a republic or it's a democracy or it's a democratic republic or whatever. It's a participatory democratic republic. And the thing that we lose, I think, as Americans is the participatory part. There's structural things that make it so we don't participate, like the Electoral College, like feeling your vote won't ultimately count. But there's just also cultural things where we don't prioritize it. And I think that's a shame. I think we're giving up our power. So part of my journey is to help people potentially see that.
Yeah. And I think that's incredibly valuable. And perhaps now more than ever, it's deeply needed.
Well, you mentioned yourself, you were 30 years ago, or almost 40 years ago now, 30 years ago. We'll go 35 years ago. That sort of George H.W. Bush Republican, still, I assume, then coming out of like a Reagan mold. What changed you? How would you define yourself today?
At that time, I was very much a product of my environment. Central Virginia, living outside Charlottesville, being raised by a single mom who thought that she understood how to position her and her family in a social environment that would somehow be beneficial to us. But what it ended up exposing us to was sort of the country club set, which, I mean, the entitlement was just so gross. You know, as a straight white male in this society, I have more privilege than I can shake a stick at. I've been in trouble with the law a handful of times, and if I was a darker color, I could very well be in prison or dead, but I'm not, and the color of my skin had a big role to play in that. But being a product of my environment at that time, late 80s, George Herbert Walker Bush, and this, what he would say on occasion, this idea of compassionate conservatism, which was really just a way to paper over the unpalatable aspects of Republican Party principles. I thought that somehow defined me and that I should know more about what that is. But the more I learned, the more I was thinking, this is a bunch of horse shit. This is really making things better for a few and worse for the many. And it just, the more I learned about it, the less sense it made. And so I kind of became aligned with the Democratic political party by default. And, you know, you think back to some of the more visible independent political candidates like Joe Lieberman, who, even though he had been Democratic for ages and then went independent to run in the presidential election, but then his congressional career stayed independent, and Joe Manchin, these guys really should have just been Republican conservatives. But then you got folks like Marianne Williamson, who, could she have been libertarian versus independent? I don't mean this to sound bad, but the best word that's coming to my mind is this sort of carnival carousel of characters. Maybe the older I'll get, the more I'll lean independent. But then, of course, the trade-off is you run the risk of throwing your vote away under the way the system is currently structured. But then are you okay doing that in order for your vote to be a demonstration vote, in order to increase the total numbers that parties like the Independent Party get, or the Green Party? You even use the phrase, you know, the pendulum swinging. And the pendulum, with every cycle, swings wider. And for it to do that, it has to swing faster because it's covering more distance from one extreme to the next. And this, I feel, is giving America political whiplash. It's like watching a tennis match where the ball is moving so fast, it's hard to follow, let alone keep score. Only the experts, the pundits, the pollsters can really translate to the average American like me what's going on. And again, this just raises the bar to entry, making the process of civic engagement less accessible. So I applaud you for what you're doing, Loren, and yeah, let me know how I can help you.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Well, your appearance on this show is a great start. So thank you, John.
And just to express my own self-interest, if you ever end up needing a foreign policy advisor, somebody's out of work.
I can't wait. You're going to get a call after this. We'll chat. We now transition to the famous last three questions of the podcast. It starts in the biggest circle and it shrinks down. If you could give Americans anything culturally, spiritually, monetarily, in their hearts, in their minds, if you could give Americans one thing, what is that one thing that you would give to your fellow Americans?
I don't know how far I can run with an answer to that, but my ideal answer would be a greater capacity for empathy. If I have to dial it back to something more tangible, it would be maybe some sort of tangible social benefit for having more engagement in other communities, a community that is not your own. So pushing you to get out of your community into another community. Let's say if there's a tax benefit for volunteering with the nonprofit in my community, well, it gets tripled if you do it in a different community. That's the best I can come up with on short notice.
If you could give the people of Tacoma Park one thing, your direct neighbors, the residents around you, the people that they're still strangers that you walk past in the grocery store, what is that one thing that you would give the people of Tacoma Park?
That's tough because this is a very, very liberal city of 17,000 people that is so liberal that for city elections, the voting age was reduced to 16. They abolished ID checks, and that includes being a citizen of the United States, like your legal status in this country. They're just, if you come and vote, by virtue of, as long as you're at least 16, by virtue of you coming and voting, you have exercised your right to that vote by showing up to vote. It's such a tiny city, and it's a great city, but it's a weird city because there's definitely like a part of the city that's like the rich old people who live in the green leafy suburbs and all the streets have tree names. And then there's a much larger part of the city where it's all multifamily dwellings and apartment buildings and a very sizable immigrant community. The city administration itself, like all organizations, is not perfect, but they try. And on a lot of occasions do a damn good job. And if I could give anything to the citizens of Tacoma Park, it would be a sincere appreciation for understanding how good they have it, whether they're the rich old white people in the tree streets that never get exposed to the social services that the city offers, to just like, hey, this is good, and let's not take advantage of it, but let's nurture it and become an example of what other neighboring communities and cities and counties and municipalities can perhaps learn from.
If you could give yourself, John, that one thing spiritually, economically, culturally, in your heart and your mind, what would you give yourself today?
That's a great question, and I might get a little choked up answering it. So this past September, we lost our oldest dog, Jasper, at the age of 15. And my wife somehow came in contact with a pet psychic. And we knew Jasper was getting old and we didn't have much time with him. So we arranged for a session with the pet psychic to understand what he wanted to do as a sort of bucket list. And it was long and intense. Like, it was mind-blowing. For a very smart little dog of 15, he had a lot of opinions. And so this written report of everything, it was like 6 pages of just what he wanted to say before the pet psychic was able to ask him the questions that we had for him about what he wanted. And that was like another 3 or 4 pages. And so then we actually did his whole bucket list. And after he passed away, we contacted the pet psychic again and had another session with him after passing over the Rainbow Bridge. And one of the pieces of advice he had for me was to love myself as much as I loved him. And that's something I don't reflect often enough on. And no matter how self-interested or self-centered or greedy people are, it is my strong conviction that if you can learn to have pure love for yourself, that will help you to have it for others. And so if there was anything I would give to myself, it's increased capacity for love, more for myself so that I could give it more to others.
That was one good dog, John. And one amazing wish for yourself. And I hope it does come true. And I see you're doing the work. And as you, like you said, reflect and it becomes a thing. I imagine that capacity is growing every day. John, this was an amazing conversation. I know we changed things up and you told me at the beginning, you're like, I'm going to ask you some questions and I'm pretty much down with anything. So I'm glad you asked me questions. I was thrilled to have been able to ask your questions. You shared deeply and honestly. John, thank you for joining.
Thank you for having me, Loren. And I hope you can stay in touch and keep up the great work, man.
Appreciate it. John hopes we can all lean into empathy more and find our way to give grace to one another. With empathy and grace for each other, we might start to focus less on what separates us and more on what connects us. I am grateful to John for sharing the morals, ethics, religious beliefs, or lack of, and views on humanity that inform his approach to culture, politics, and government. I am excited to always be bringing you more of this content. Please consider supporting this work and becoming a paying member at $8 per month by visiting weunitewewin.com. Come back for the next episode to find our next stop in user-generated America. No fear, only love.